All right, welcome. These are your Unit 3.2 notes, Unit 3, Lesson 2, and the title of this lesson is Growing Resentment Against Britain. And keep in mind these two notes here, while there is a lot of information written down on these slides, there are several points in time where you're going to have to definitely listen to the audio to get the rest of the information that is not written down on the slides for things that you need in your notes. So don't be afraid to pause or rewind to re-listen to things. Also, if you get really stuck, all of this information can be found in our textbook on pages 142 to 153, so keep that in mind. So, conflicts or fighting over land, British colonists and the Native Americans. The French and Indian War is over now as of 1763, but there's still going to be more conflict. Even fighting between colonists and them started immediately after the war, which is weird because, the war is over. Shouldn't there be there's the peace treaty? Shouldn't everything be fine? But in fact, there was still fighting between the British colonists and the Native Americans after the war was over because those tribes that had sided with France during the war are still bitter and upset that France lost the war. So there is still fighting here. Conflict between Britain and natives after the war between the British colonists and any tribes that had sided with France who were on the losing end of the war, which has to do with information in your notes, so make sure you pause there. An example of this conflict is known as Pontiac's War. So Pontiac, who was the leader of the Ottawa Nation, an Ottawa tribe, formed alliances or kind of legal friendships with other tribes. And in 1763, so this is the year that the war is over, so shortly after, they destroyed 6 British forts while killing 2,000 settlers. The Ottawa were not happy with the British being there, not happy that the British won, so he attacks some British forts. The British reacted just as violently, maybe even more so, more violently, and they killed several tribes of native groups who weren't even involved in the Pontiac's attack. So the British retaliated not just against the Ottawa tribe, but against other, completely innocent people who had nothing to do with it. So a little intense, killing women and children as well. And this little conflict is known as Pontiac's War, which ended a couple months in 1764. I believe in your notes it says describe key points of Pontiac's War. You do not have to write all of this down, but you might summarize it. You might say something like Ottawa tribe attacks British, British retaliate extra violently, ends in 1764, something like that. But you should definitely shorten this. You do not have to copy all that down. Shorten it, use your brain, and summarize. Another thing that happened in 1763, along at the same time basically as the Treaty of Paris that ended the war, was that the British issued a document called the Proclamation of 1763. It banned the colonists settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. In your notes, it says, what is the purpose of the Proclamation of 1763? Well, there you go. Ban British people from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains. Remember in previous units, we've talked about that kind of mountainous backcountry region. They're talking about you can't move west of that. Now, the reason kind of behind this is because if the British colonists stay on one side and the Native Americans stay on the other, then theoretically they won't get into these fights, kind of like Pontiac's War. That's kind of the hope behind it. However, unfortunately, the proclamation of 1763 was not enforced. It was not effective. It was ignored, and it was also kind of impossible to enforce. The Appalachian Mountains are thousands of miles long. It's a very long border. Britain sent 10,000 troops over to the colonies to try to enforce it and kind of be border patrol and make sure that none of the people moved west. But often those soldiers didn't leave the coast. They didn't go do their job, so it wasn't enforced. People didn't take it seriously, and so British colonists, even after this proclamation and after the end of the French Indian War, continued to move west of the Appalachians, which is going to lead to increased conflict. In your notes, it says, was the proclamation effective? And explain why. So, no, but you need to explain why it was not effective there. And the last bit in your notes is Pontiac and other native tribes shared some of these views. Were against British settlers for several reasons, but the biggest one being even after the peace of the end of the war and the proclamation of 1763, the British were still taking their land and still moving on to native land and encroaching on that boundary. So that has to do with number 4. Feel free to pause, make sure you have that written down there as well. Also, when you are doing these on your own in the Canvas assignment, there are some extra links to videos that are the short clips about extra information if you need it. If you were to click on this picture or this link, it would take you to a very short clip about Pontiac's War, if that is helpful to you as well. Our next slide has to do with British rule versus the colonists living there. Britain believed that the colonists should pay for most of the French and Indian War debt. Winning wars isn't cheap. You have to spend money on troops and soldiers and supplies and all these things, so they won the war, but at a great financial cost. And so Britain says, oh, have the colonists pay for those expenses because the soldiers were there protecting the colonists from the Native Americans and from the French. The idea of mercantilism had been around for a while. It was kind of popular, but Britain also uses this to say that a colony exists or is created to serve and help out the mother country. So the idea that the British colonies, the 13 British colonies that we've studied, Britain made those so that they would help make money for England, for Britain, the mother country. So they didn't really feel bad about taxing the colonies because it's kind of your job to make us money and help us out. It's kind of that idea here. In 1764, Parliament passed, as a fundraising measure, the Sugar Act, which put a tax on several products like molasses that were imported into the colonies. In your notes, it says the Sugar Act taxes what? And write more than sugar. You should write molasses. Obviously today, if you've ever been to a restaurant, they have those little packets, tons of different types of sweeteners. Well, they have sugar, just like this kind of cube sugar that you think of, but they also used molasses and some other natural products as sweeteners. So it wasn't just sugar, it was molasses and other sweeteners. And taxing that raised money to pay for the war debt. Later, since 1765, as a fundraising effort, the British passed what's called the Quartering Act, and this was to save money. The Sugar Act is to raise money, the Quartering Act is to save money. And this said that the British soldiers could go into any house of colonists and the owner had to feed and supply and let them stay as long as they needed. Your quarters, we're not talking about the 25-cent coin here. Quarter is your space, your personal space. So your bedroom is your quarters. It's where you live, it's your personal space. So the Quartering Act said colonists are responsible for housing the soldiers and paying for their food, getting their laundry done, that type of thing. Now, this did not go over well with the colonists at all because they had total strangers living in their house, and your house is your house and you should be able to say who comes in and out of your house. That also meant that they had to pay for all these people's food, and like I said, do their laundry, make sure that their weapons were clean and things like that. And the British government was saving money because now the government isn't paying to upkeep the soldiers. Individual colonists are the ones paying. So super duper not popular, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Things get worse. In 1765, they passed the Stamp Act. This required all colonists to buy special stamps that would be put on all sorts of paper products, including but not limited to things like newspapers, wills, licenses like your marriage license, that type of thing, diplomas, like legal documents, playing cards is a paper product. I don't know why they put a stamp on dice, but I guess if you had the dice with your cards, it made sense, and a bunch of other things. So in your notes, I think it says the Stamp Act taxes what besides stamps. So, discuss some of those paper products. If this happened today, that would be like saying you had to pay for a stamp for every piece of paper you used to do your homework. And toilet paper, that's a paper product. Paper plates. You see how this would rack up really fast, how much people use paper. Colonists, super duper not happy about this. Some were so upset that store owners in some of the larger cities, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, refused to buy certain British goods, which is a form of peaceful protest, are called boycotting, which then spread to other colonies. So people said, I'm not going to take sugar in my tea anymore, which was a big deal for British people because British people love their tea. I'm not going to purchase, some of these paper products, etc. They started boycotting as a form of peaceful protest to these new laws. And the boycotts worked to some extent, a little bit. Parliament repealed is a fancy word for got rid of, the Stamp Act, but they passed a new law called the Declaratory Act. And this new law says that Parliament can increase taxes in any case whatsoever. So basically, the boycotts did get rid of the Stamp Act, but the colonists still had to worry because this new law says, well, by the way, if we want to increase taxes on anything else later, we can, and you have no say. So all these things are super duper not popular here. I'm going to pause here. In your notes, we talked about the Sugar Act. What does it tax besides sugar? What does the Quartering Act mean? What did the Stamp Act tax besides stamps? What do they do to respond to these taxes? What form of peaceful protest are they using? What led to the repeal of the Stamp Act? The fact that the businesses were losing money from these boycotts. Was the Stamp Act the end of their concerns? No, but explain why. But our last two sections here talk about why are 3 reasons the colonists thought that these taxes were unjust, and why does Britain think that they're reasonable, which is kind of this last bit down here. So, for all of these things, one of the first reasons, number 7, why colonists thought they were unjust is 1, they had no say or representation in the government making these decisions. The people in the British government and British Parliament that were making these laws were only people living in Britain. Colonists living, 2,000 miles across the sea were not allowed to be members of Parliament. So they're getting all these rules sent down to them, but they have no say. If we had at least talked about it, we could have come to a compromise or something. But no, they have no voice or representation. So that's one reason why these are unjust. Another reason that they thought that they were unfair or unjust is that several of them are a severe invasion of their privacy. They were particularly referring to the Courting Act, saying, I shouldn't have to have strangers in my house. That's an invasion of my personal privacy. And a third reason why they felt that these were unjust is, in fact, the British, during the French Indian War, a lot of the heavy lifting and the fighting and a lot of the burden and responsibility for Britain during the French Indian War actually was given to the colonists. The colonists had done a lot of the fighting, the heavy lifting, not the soldiers sent from Britain. So they said, dude, you're paying for the war, but we helped you win the war, so why is all the burden following on us and not as well the people in Britain? So those are 3 reasons for number 7 that you need to discuss there. And number 8, why does Britain feel that these policies are reasonable? Because they're like, we have valid reasons. One is that they felt like they protected the colonists in the French Indian War. We sent soldiers, they fought, we protected you from the French. Another is this mercantilism idea, which we talked about. Your colony is supposed to make us money, and so this is one of the ways we're doing that. And the third is that even after the French Indian War, the British are sending soldiers to protect, quote unquote, them from Native Americans. So both sides had what they believed to be valid reasons why the laws are either good or bad. So make sure that you've discussed those in 7 and 8 on your notes before you continue on.